don't know that you'd be able to tell what this sermon is going to be about by looking at the parting of the Red Sea. But I wanted to start here because the lesson today likely, not stated so in Scripture in so many words, but likely includes someone who is not mentioned in the Exodus. If we go to Exodus chapter 14, Moses said to the people, "Do not fear." Well, now that sounds like good advice. In front of them is the Red Sea, where they would drown if they tried to cross, and behind them is the pursuing Egyptian army. And Moses says, don't worry about it, don't be afraid. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you've seen today, you'll never see them again. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Sounds like He's standing there and saying, just stand still, everything's going to be wonderful. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward." They were not to stand still. They were to move forward. And interestingly enough, there is a passage in the book of Corinthians that tells us a little bit about what's going to take place on the other side. And that the leadership of Moses is going to continue. And this is important because the lesson is going to get to somebody else who played an important role in the life of Moses. Not talking about his brother Aaron. I'm not talking about Aaron's sons who became high priests, 2 of which were killed because of their disobedience, Eleazar and Ithamar. I'm not talking about them. But I'm talking about someone else who, in all likelihood, in my opinion, was with Moses when this happened. And God is getting these people ready, not just to follow Moses through the Red Sea, but further on. Listen, I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, how our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses. Do you see what's being said here? When you get across the Red Sea, the man you are to follow is Moses. He is going to be my lawgiver. He's going to be your intercessor. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, Moses is compared to Christ in that Moses is a servant in God's house. Christ is the son in God's house. Let me continue reading. They were all baptized into Moses, just like we're baptized into Christ, in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. Christ, in spirit, is going to be working through Moses. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness, and we're going to get into that today. Romans chapter 6 and verse 4 compares what happened with them and their being baptized into Moses. Listen in Romans 6 and 4. Therefore we are buried with him, Christ, through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. Now, once they got through the Red Sea, who were they? Who were these people? Who were the leaders of these people before they ever crossed the Red Sea? I would like for you to raise your hand when you recognize any of these names. Shammua, Shaphat, Igal, Hoshea, Palti, Gidiel, Gidai, Amiel. No hands yet? Sether. She knows what I'm preaching about. Nabi and Jeuel. Recognize any of those? I'll give you one more. Goes in the same list. Caleb. Recognize that name? Now, I'm going to tell you about another one of the names, and that name is Hoshea. It says in Numbers 13 and 3 that all of these men were the heads of the sons of Israel, and these are the men later on that are going to be sent into the promised land to spy it out. Now, do you think who Hoshea might be? Put a J in front of his name. What do you come up with? Joshua. Joshua is Hoshea, but the difference is the word Hoshea means saved or delivered. If you put J-E in front of it, or J-L, Joshua, it means Joshua saves, Jehovah saves, or Jehovah leads. What you're finding out is that Moses renamed Joshua to that name rather than just Hoshea. These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. But Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun Joshua. Now, what about Joshua? Why would I think that perhaps Joshua was on this side of the Jordan River? His servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, Exodus 33 and 11. Numbers 11 and 28. Joshua was the attendant of Moses from his youth. Did you know that? In all likelihood, he at least was the attendant of Moses from the time they crossed the Red Sea, and in my opinion, not book, chapter, and verse, he likely was an attendant of Moses at the crossing of the Red Sea. Joshua was given some special favors that even Aaron didn't get. Even the elders of Israel didn't get. You see, what God is doing with Joshua is getting him ready. So I want you to pay a little bit of attention to the fact that God sometimes uses the experiences of our life to get us ready for great things. Things we never expected. There's a passage in the book of Ephesians that says God can do more with us than we can think or imagine. And I suspect that would be true of Joshua. Joshua is the attendant. Joshua is the servant of Moses. So God is equipping this young man. How so? Remember, Joshua is going to be with him as we skim through the chapters following the Exodus. The song of deliverance. The people complain about the water being bitter. Where's Joshua? Right by Moses. Who are they complaining to? Moses. Who's hearing all of these complaints? Joshua. We don't think about that. We normally just think Moses is being cornered by the people and no one else hears anything. Who's with Moses when he throws the branch into the water and by God's power the water's made sweet? Who is his attendant? Who's his servant that is with him? Who is learning the power of God? Who is going to need and know that power later on in their own life? Chapter 16, they're traveling, and guess what the Israelites do? They're grumbling again. Who do they grumble to? They grumble to Moses. Who's Moses' attendant? Joshua is. Joshua is learning about people. He's learning how to work with grumbling people. He's learning how to take those problems to God and deal with those problems under the direction of God. But all we read about is Moses. But Joshua is his attendant. Chapter 17, they complain about not having water at all. Moses strikes the rock. And now the Amalekites do not like these people coming into their land. What Moses asks is permission to pass through. And let me put it in my Oklahoma slang, no way. So their army comes out against them. Guess who Moses sends out to lead the fight? Joshua. What is Joshua learning that's going to be important later? What's he learning that's going to be vital in his leadership in the conquering of the land of Canaan? Joshua is learning military skills. He's learning people skills. He's learning military skills. What are you learning that is equipping you to do great things for God? Chapter 18. Moses decides to take all of the people's problems. I assume Joshua's there with him most of the time. In fact, we're going to read a verse that's rather interesting about that in a few minutes, about Joshua's presence when the people come and have problems and want Moses to solve them. Moses' father-in-law says, Moses, you've taken too much upon yourself. Divide that responsibility out among people. And he does. What is Joshua learning? Joshua is learning you cannot carry all of the load by yourself. I'm not even sure Joshua is aware that God's preparing for him to be the next leader of the children of Israel when Moses goes to the mountain and is taken away and buried by God in a place that no one knows. Joshua is being prepared. What are we being prepared to do for God? Chapter 19, they arrive at Mount Sinai. Chapter 20, the law and the statutes are given, the covenant is renewed, the tabernacle and its furnishings are described by God, the priesthood is put into place, and God talks about the Sabbath. But in Exodus chapter 24, I want you to notice a couple of things as we read. Then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and you shall worship at a distance. Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people come up to him. Nothing's mentioned about Joshua. But we go now to Exodus chapter 24, verses 9 through 13. And we find there that Joshua actually is with Moses. You see, Joshua, because he is an attendant, because he is Moses' servant, he follows him just about everywhere. But that's not mentioned, except only in a few places. The fact that Joshua was sent out to fight the Amalekites, outstanding. And the fact that he's not even mentioned here, Moses went up in verses 9 through 13, and then it says, now the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and remain there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the law and the commandments which I have written for their instruction. So Moses arose with Joshua his servant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. Did you know that? He just gets a word in passing, kind of like, and Joshua too, and Joshua too. They go up on the mountain. God gives them, they start coming down from the mountain. And here's what it says in Exodus 32, 17 and 18. Now when Joshua heard, what? When Joshua heard the sounds of the people as they shouted, they were down there worshiping a golden calf and just having a big old time doing what pagans do. Because they decided Moses had abandoned them and they were going to go back home to Egypt. And Joshua is the one who says to Moses, that's the sound of war in the camp. But he, Moses, said, it is not the sound of the cry of triumph, nor the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. Joshua was with him. Was he there when God gave him the commandments? We don't know. But if he was, what was God preparing Joshua to do? What was Joshua to do? Exodus 33 and verse 11. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a young man speaks to his friend. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Do you hear what he just said? When Moses goes into the tent of meeting to meet with God, to deal with judging the people's problems in the tent of meeting, who's with him? And who stays in the tent of meeting when Moses leaves? It's Joshua. I have to admit, I did not know all that about Joshua until I prepared this sermon. I would just see Joshua's name here and there and think, well, Joshua's getting ready to be the next leader of the people, but so what? But there's more to it than that. God is getting this man ready to be the ones who take his people into the promised land. What is God getting us ready for? Was he getting me ready for the pulpit? Because I'm thinking my days of getting ready are not as long as they used to be. But for some of you, who knows what God's getting you ready for? But you have to be willing to be prepared. And there's a price for that. There's a price for learning to follow God. And a price for wanting to follow God as Joshua did. Chapter 34. Moses was so angry when he came down from the mountain and the people were worshiping the golden calf that he threw the stone tablets that the finger of God had written on the ground. God calls him back up to the mountain, and this time he has to chisel the stones out. The first time God took care of that for him, but this time he has to chisel them out. And he comes down and gives the law to the people. Chapter 35. The temple, the tabernacle is now going to be constructed. The priests are going to be ordained, and the presence of God will enter the tabernacle. But God's not done equipping Joshua. In Numbers chapter 14 and 29. Let me back up. This is Joshua and Caleb pictured. The 12 spies have gone into the land. It is as fruitful as God said it was. But there were a people there that frightened 10 of the spies, and only 2, Joshua and Caleb, came back and said, "We can take the land with God's help." Joshua's faith in God had been built to the point that whatever they saw in the land of Canaan, however big the people were, however strong they were, however big the city walls were, Joshua and Caleb said, "We can do it with God's help." And they were so angry at the response of the other spies and the people deciding, "We can't do it, let's go back home to Egypt." They tore their robes apart in anger. That back then was the ultimate expression of disgust and anger, to be expressed without acting in violent ways toward other people. And that's what they were doing. God has promised this. You have seen the 10 plagues. You have seen the Red Sea parted. You have walked through on dry land. You have seen the sea destroy the Egyptian army following. And now you're ready to go back to Egypt. This is how godly people feel when people of the world speak of God in disdain and disgust. It reflects the mind of Jesus when he saw those people selling animals in the Gentile court where they should have freedom to come to worship. And when he saw the money changers there, more interested in making money than the Gentiles coming to worship, and he drove them out. That was what Joshua felt, and Caleb. And God said, "Move out of the way, and I'll wipe them out. And Moses, I will make your descendants my people." And Moses begged God, "Please, if you're going to wipe them out, wipe me out too. Please don't wipe them out." And who would be his attendant hearing those words? And God says for Moses to tell the people of Israel, "Your corpses will fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered men, age 20 and up, according to your complete number, from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. And according to the number of days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for every day you will bear guilt a year, even 40 years, and you will know my opposition." And who were the 2 that made it, who were over 20 years of age? Numbers chapter 14 and verse 28. Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua would become their next leader. He was being trained. It wasn't that during this time of training he wasn't useful, for he was. He led the army against the Amalekites. He was one of the spies who went into the land. He was busy, but there was something bigger coming down the road. Something that God was getting him ready for. Time has moved on. They have gone through the wilderness. They have had their share of grumbling and complaining. And now it's time for Joshua to take his new role. So we go to Numbers 27 and following. Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, May the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who will go out and come in before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be like a sheep without a shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, Take Joshua, the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him, and have him stand before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. Do you remember that Moses thought he was ready at the age of 40? And he thought that the children of Israel would know that he's supposed to lead them out. And when he killed the Egyptian, he had to flee. And for 40 more years, God was getting Moses ready to do what Moses needed to do. Joshua wasn't ready when they crossed the Red Sea. But 40 years later, he was. He was busy during that time, no doubt, doing many things. I suspect he got to run here and there on numerous occasions for Moses. But now he was ready. These are the names of the men who shall apportion the land to you for an inheritance: Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun. So one of Joshua's jobs, knowing people as he did, knowing how to deal with grumbling as he did, knowing to seek the help of God as he did. He was the one who was to say, Judah gets this land, Benjamin gets this land, Ephraim gets this land, Manasseh gets this land, Naphtali gets this land. He was the one prepared to do this, for he himself had been one of the spies who had gone into the land. Deuteronomy chapter 3 and verse 28. Charge Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go across at the head of his people, and he will give them as an inheritance the land which you see. Joshua. Moses has been the man to catch it before. He's been the man to hear the grumbling, but it's going to be you now. You need strength and encouragement. In fact, God says to Joshua in chapter 1, 6 through 7, Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn to it from the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. And it says in verse 9, Now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses laid his hands on him, and the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And for those of you in Bible class, guess what happens at Shechem? It was at Shechem that the leaders of Israel are called together. And for those of you who may not have been in Bible class, this is where the woman of the well at Samaria was. Shechem was under the control of Samaria in the days of Christ. But on this occasion, this is where Joshua chapter 24 and verse 1 gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel and for their heads and their judges and their officers, and they presented themselves before God. And then in Joshua 24 verses 14 and 15, he says to the people, Now therefore fear the Lord, and in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, then choose for yourselves today whom you will serve. whether the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in which land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He's ready. He's ready for the hardest job of his life. But I do want to read to you Joshua 24 and verse 31. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, and had known all the deeds of the Lord which he had done for Israel. Joshua was able to help the people stay faithful to God. Joshua, servant of Moses, servant of God. I picked 3 words that I think I wanted to stress for the qualities that Joshua had that we need to put into our own lives. Number 1, loyalty to God. He was loyal to Moses, but he was loyal to God. How loyal do we need to be to God? How loyal are you to God and his purpose for your life? A little loyal? If you were to ask yourself, and your reflection could speak back, and you went to the mirror and you were to say, may I use myself as an example? Bill, are you truly loyal to God? Are you a dedicated Christian? What would the image in the mirror say? And then I picked another word, willing. Joshua appeared to be willing to do whatever God and Moses needed to have done. And so I continued to stand in front of the mirror. And I asked this reflection, who, for sake of illustration, can speak back to me and tell the truth. And I say, Bill, are you willing to do whatever God wants you to do? What would the answer be? And then the last word I picked was equipped. Bill, are you willing for God to equip you for great service? Great doesn't mean everybody knows about it. In fact, Jesus said, the one among you who wants to be the greatest shall be the least. It's not notoriety that makes a person great. It's the greatness of their heart of service. You see, there are a lot of people in our world who want to be saved, but not be a servant. Their prayers are filled with requests for God to serve them. Their prayers are filled with God to make people they love well. Their prayers are filled with requests for good health. And all of those are good things. But what about the prayers that I may be as loyal to you, Father, as you are to me? May I be as willing to serve and grow in my Christ-likeness. Am I wanting to be equipped and willing to be equipped for greater things than now. I think that's the story of Joshua. May it be ours. Thank you for your time and your attention to the Word of God. We're going to stand and sing a hymn of invitation, but you know what my invitation is to you: to be loyal, to be willing, to be equipped. If you've never been baptized into Christ, that opportunity is yours. If you are a member of the Lord's church and you haven't been faithful, today's a good time to say, Lord, I'm coming home, like the prodigal son. And his arms are wide open. Or today may be a day that you just like to let us know you want to be a part of our congregation. We'd love to have you. If you'll just help us get to heaven, we'll do our best to help you get there too. Let's stand and sing.